Hello, everyone, and a big official welcome to today's special Firstbeat webinar event. My name is Herman Bonner, and I'm your host today. We have a great speaker, Firstbeat's very own Tiina Hoffman, who will talk to us about good and bad stress. Tiina is an exercise physiologist by trade. She completed her Bachelor's of Science at the University of Alaska, where she also worked as the school's cross-country skiing coach. She completed her master's degree in exercise physiology at the University of Jyväskylä. She's joining us today from Firstbeat headquarters. Greetings, Tiina. Welcome.
Thank you, Herman, and welcome everybody. It's great to see so many people from all around the world here today. So today's topic, good or bad stress. Interesting question and a very provocative question in many ways, and I don't claim to have the final word or some kind of ultimate answer to the question, but I will plan to discuss what stress is from a physiological point of view, and then share some examples and strategies based on Firstbeat measurements on what it all means. So stress typically has a rather negative connotation. We don't think of it as anything good. But physiologically speaking, stress is a natural reaction that increases the body's activation level, and in the short term, it helps us meet daily challenges and improve our mental and physical performance. Sort of gets us up to the task and ready to get through the day's demands. But then when it's excessive or long-term or chronic in our life, then it's definitely known that stress weakens our well-being and performance, and in the long term also makes us susceptible to physical and mental illnesses. Very strong research and findings and correlations have been found between chronic stress and then various physical and mental illnesses. So in other words, one could also say that stress is a situation where the demands that we are faced with are greater than the available resources, our ability to cope with those demands. Basically, do we embrace and tackle the stress head on, or do we cave under it? So how we experience and deal with that is something important, understanding that, and for staying resilient as well. And the picture that I put here is kind of it kind of symbolizes a stress reaction in a very extreme format. It's an extreme example of Finnish stress. We cut a hole in the ice and we dip in it for something fun to do in the winter time. And obviously, this is me actually dipping in the ice in the winter, and obviously that causes a very strong acute stress reaction. Heart rate increases and the body is sort of fighting to stay alive. So can't think of a much stronger stress reaction acutely. But then when the situation is over and you come out, it actually feels very good. It promotes recovery, and studies have even shown that it tends to improve our resistance against different illnesses and also just stress. So just a good example of how an acute stress situation itself is not going to hurt us unless then we take care of, as long as we take care of it afterwards. In the back of the
Hi,
stress...
Tiina. Sorry, can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
I was stressed out myself a little bit at the beginning, and I forgot to mention that if any of our guests have questions during the presentation, that they can type them into the chat box on the side, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So, thanks.
All right,
a good example of stress in action. Thanks.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to discuss them afterwards. So in the back of the stress reaction is the autonomic nervous system and its sympathetic and parasympathetic branches. Sympathetic side being the system that speeds up bodily functions at different levels of physiology, increasing the heart rate, reducing heart rate variability, increasing respiration, and that causes some kind of a stress reaction. A classic fight or flight symptom that many are familiar with, meaning that when we have to meet a challenge, whether it's a scary situation or a challenging situation, we need to kick the body into gear to be able to meet up with that challenge, sort of the gas of the body. And then on the other side is the parasympathetic system, which slows down bodily function, the brake of the body. Heart rate slows down, heart rate variability increases, and it allows the body to recover. And in the Firstbeat reports that I will dig into a little bit deeper in the next few slides, the red color symbolizes sympathetic dominance, and the green color symbolizes dominance of the parasympathetic nervous system. And the key in this context, they're both normal. So the key is how we regulate this interplay and balance between the two systems. Are we able to switch from the side of sympathetic dominance to parasympathetic dominance, at least when we are sleeping, instead of staying on the stress side of things all of the time. So before we go further, I'm just going to quickly introduce what is Firstbeat Lifestyle Assessment for those listeners who are not familiar with that in advance. What I mean when I talk about Firstbeat Lifestyle Assessment. So basically it's a 3-day heart rate variability measurement in daily life. Person wears a device that measures their every heartbeat. They wear it at work, during leisure time, and during sleep, typically for a 3-day period. And then the reports that they will get from that assessment show how their individual responses are to different daily events, looking at stress management, recovery and sleep, and physical activity, sort of as the three cornerstones of a good lifestyle. And then going a little bit deeper from that, what the colors in the report actually mean. The 3 main states that we are talking about is stress reaction, the red color that you can see in this report here, recovery, the green color, and then physical activity. And like I mentioned, stress reaction means sympathetic nervous system dominance, increased activation level in the body. It can be positive and negative things, very normal part of life. It can be work pressure, being hurried, having to face different kind of conflicts, maybe some kind of fear or worry, but also positive experiences and challenges that we are faced with. So normal part of life, as long as it doesn't dominate our life 24/7. Recovery, the green color, means calming down of the body, dominance of the parasympathetic nervous system, and we would typically like to see it at least here when the person is sleeping. The green color here indicates that the body is able to go into a recovery mode. And then our analysis also looks at physical activity, so I don't get into details about that today, but basically when the heart rate and respiration rate are elevated and the oxygen uptake is elevated to a certain minimal level, then the analysis will identify it as physical activity, and it's actually not possible for us to show stress reactions or recovery reaction while we are exercising, because physiologically it's sort of a fundamentally different state. And I noticed there had been some questions already in advance about this, so it is good to keep in mind that physical exercise, it's one kind of stress on the body, of course, whether it's good or bad, but it's in its own state in the Firstbeat reports. And then in addition to that, we are looking at stress reactions and recovery reactions. So Firstbeat analysis doesn't actually differentiate between positive and negative stress, and it's also oftentimes very hard for the person themselves to know if a situation is positive or negative. This graph shows an example of that. This is from a colleague of mine. She was watching the Olympics here. You can see a very high red spikes, meaning that there's a strong stress reaction at this moment. The heart rate is increasing and the stress is spiking out. She's watching the Olympics. Her team was doing really well and it was very exciting and fun, but physiologically it's causing a stress reaction. And then a couple of hours later, after the workday, she had to go shopping. It's not her favorite thing to do. It was a busy, crowded store and she was kind of tired and in a hurry. And it caused a very similar physiological reaction here. You can again see a spike, increase in heart rate. So physiologically, we are not able to identify a difference between these two situations. But then the idea, of course, being that the negative type of stress, it's going to have more detrimental effects for our recovery afterwards, whereas positive stress usually we feel better about it afterwards. And the next slide actually goes into a bit more detail about this. So positive or negative stress, it's an important differentiator how we cope with that. Positive stress, it activates the body, improves our efficiency, helps us meet the daily demands, but in general it doesn't disturb our ability to sleep or our ability to calm down and recover afterwards. So the top example here is a good example of that. A fairly busy work day, quite a bit going on, some stuff going on in the evening, but then when the person goes to sleep, they go into good recovery almost right away. Then the example below that, the daytime itself looks pretty similar. Obviously, you can see that the top graph has a little bit of recovery during the daytime. Here, there is no sign of green during the daytime at all. One meeting after the next, feeling hurried, kind of meeting, going from deadline to deadline, some work emails in the evening. And when the person goes to sleep, they are not getting any recovery during the sleep period at all, or hardly at all. So the idea being that negative stress, tends to keep our body activated or wired and prevents recovery when we actually go resting or sleeping. It's not so easy to turn negative stress off, whereas positive stress usually it helps us perform, but then we can turn it off and go on afterwards. And of course, at this point, it's good to remind and note that even positive stress, even if it's basically good for us, if it's very ongoing and very strong and goes on week after week, like when somebody is in a very positive driving phase of their life, maybe a new business or new relationship and new exciting things happening, even that kind of positive stress, it tends to cause problems if it's constant and excessive. It tends to wear us out. So people often neglect to think about this positive stress. They think of it as only as a good thing, but we still have to make sure that we find the time to get enough sleep and sometimes slow down and give the body a chance to rest up afterwards. All right, so when we look at the most common stressors, we have a fairly large database. We've been doing these measurements for over 10 years, and we have over 150,000 measurement days accumulated in the database. And this list here shows some of the most common stressors, what we find that affect people's lives. They can be categorized into physical or psychological stressors and many different kind of things. Some such that we can affect them and we can make conscious effort to eliminate them or to avoid them. Others obviously being more of normal part of life that sometimes everyone faces different kind of issues or challenges. And the key is so much not to try to eliminate these stressors in the life, but instead to find a way to cope with them and deal with them in the best possible way. The number one list here on the physical stressors, alcohol, that's clearly raises as the number one stressor based on our measurements as well. It's the most typical factor that would explain a sleep period that looks like the example here, that looks pretty much all red. The heart rate stays elevated, sympathetic nervous system is kicking in all through the night, and some kind of good quality recovery is not happening at all. And obviously, especially when different stressors are combined, so when you have a number of different stressors affecting you, like in this case the guy was working after work day, working in the evening on the computer, and then having a few drinks in addition to that, and clearly were not able to turn the brain or the body off when they went to sleep, and then the sleep doesn't look very good in this case. And again, what I would say that instead of, we can't eliminate all of these stressors, but we can learn to control those stressors that we actually have a chance to affect. And the next slide looks at a little bit more of this. What's the effect of the most common stressors on recovery, sort of on a scale from moderate or slight effect to strong effect. And I have three examples here side by side. Slight effect meaning, for example, this kind of delayed recovery. So when you go to sleep, it takes a couple of hours before the body begins to truly recover. And that happens very typically after a busy day, maybe a few negative things or hurried things or emotions in the evening before bedtime, maybe something stressful going on. Electronic devices can clearly cause this kind of a delay. Alcohol in small amounts, one or two units often causes a small delay like this. And as you can see, I mentioned alcohol here in all of the categories because we have found a very strong dose-response relationship with that. The more units there are, the bigger the effect is. And then if there are 5 or more units, clearly the effect almost across the board tends to be so that there's very, very little high-quality recovery during that sleep period. But of course, other things as well. Heavy exercise in the evening can cause some disturbance in the sleep, and I'll show an example of that. And particularly if it's very high intensity exercise in just in the hours before bedtime, then we often see a very strong effect on sleep. Illnesses and medications, and then whenever you have a combination of these common stressors, then of course the effect potentiates from that. When the person is met with a very particularly challenging time or feeling very stretched, then one of the things that we do in our lifestyle coaching is to try to help them determine what are the kinds of things that they can eliminate in that kind of life situation. So for example, if you know that you are stretched, then alcohol clearly is not a good coping mechanism for that. It can be a nice way to relax sometimes when everything is well, but when you are struggling, then that's probably one of the first things to go, and often comes up in our feedback discussions as well. Hard exercise the same way, and the next slide actually illustrates that a little bit more. So when we do intensive exercise in the evening, of course, sometimes we have to do that. There are days when that's the only time we have a chance to go and do our exercise. And if we are interested in fitness and into our fitness, it's not always possible to do it during the daytime. But it's good to be aware that acutely that almost always has a little bit of a deteriorating effect on the following night's sleep. It keeps the body physiologically a little bit stimulated. The heart rate stays up, and it might take several hours before you start actually getting proper recovery. And the lesson from this is not so much to avoid this kind of training, but to take that into consideration in the overall training plan, so that you are sure to include an easier day after something like this. And if possible, or if you are having challenges with sleep, then to try to schedule these kind of high intensity exercise sessions when the training effect is very high on the weekend or earlier in the day, if possible at all. All right. This slide is called misconceptions. Maybe it's not exactly the right word, but maybe what I mean to say is that it's really important to learn to recognize our individual stressors. How different things affect us. And this is the same person here, same person, 2 different nights. Thursday evening, they did some work in the evening in a couple of hours before bedtime. And working in the evening before bedtime is probably one of the more common sort of no-nos that we discuss. For most people, it doesn't do too much good. It tends to leave the brain active, and the things that we do with work in the evening tend to creep into our sleep and disturb the sleep. It happens very easily, but at the same time, we also have seen that with some people, maybe an hour of work in the evening, it might help put their mind at peace and feel like, okay, I'm done with today's demands. Now I can close the computer and I'm ready to slow down and go to sleep. And in her case, it really worked like that. She was able to get a very nice recovery after that. And then the next night, Friday night, she did sort of a very typical, I'm just going to have a few drinks to relax because it's Friday. And she had 3 units of alcohol, and clearly the sleep was quite a bit disturbed. Probably because of that, maybe some accumulated stress as well, but certainly this is something that people often do to relax, but in effect, the physiological effect is very rarely relaxing. Mentally it can be, but physiologically often not. So whenever we are talking about stress and recovery, it's a very personal journey and personal learning lesson to see what affects me, how, and then learning to make the right conclusions from that. So how to manage stress, how to find a better way to manage the different demands that we have. It's not about avoiding stress. We don't need to try to avoid stress, but it's more about the management of the overall load of life. The load meaning the demands of work, the demands of family, demands of our exercise program, sort of everything that we are faced with, how we can put that into such a package that we are able to handle it and then recover after that. Finding a balance between work and leisure time, and finding a balance between doing things and then also finding the time to rest. And I would say that sort of with the basic healthy pillars of lifestyle that most people are quite aware of, that just don't always remember to pay attention to them. It's really the key. Are we sleeping enough? Do you prioritize sleep and make sure you're getting your 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night? Probably the most important thing on stress management coaching. And then do we eat healthy? Of course, a good healthy diet and regular eating during the day and hydration, that's very important for overall well-being as well, and can clearly help us handle stress demands and stressful situations during the day. Are you physically active enough? We find a very strong connection between people who are physically active and fit. They do overall have a better ability to handle stress. When you are fit, you can handle the different demands that you meet during the day, and you're able to more quickly turn it off and slow down. Your heart rate slows down, and you can get into the recovery mode better. So physical activity is a very good stress management method, even if sometimes acutely it might throw off our sleep a little bit, but in the big picture, fitness is one of the best things that we can do to help handle stress loads as well. And then, of course, this point here, do you enjoy life and the things that you do? So when we tend to have a positive outlook on life, how we cope with things, it definitely helps us also face sometimes demanding and difficult situations. And that's a good point to keep in mind when trying to find better ways to manage stress. And of course, reacting early, that's one of the things that with lifestyle assessment also we try to help people with, because the report like this, it often brings out things that they can't really see. They don't really know it, but then when they see a visual graph and they see how their own behaviors are actually showing in the physiological report. So it's a very concrete thing that they can then find some things they can change to hopefully get some better results. When I say bad stress, I really just mean excessive or chronic or negative stress. It can be difficult to identify stress because sometimes the way we think about it can be quite different in how the physiology reacts to that. And the list here just sort of just reminds us that there are many different kind of physical and psychological symptoms of stress that people sort of need to be aware of, that any of these things can be caused by stress, but of course by other things as well. And maybe instead of paying too much attention to that this time, I would just rather focus on what we can do to help our clients or help ourselves to cope with the stress and find meaningful ways to relax and recover, to make sure that our busy lives also have those moments and those times when we are able to take the load off and have some peaceful time. It's a very personal, individual journey. This list kind of highlights that there is not going to be any one thing that works for everyone. Relaxation, mindfulness, meditation techniques are great. Many people do that, but for somebody else it might be listening to music or strolling in the forest or doing some kind of a hobby that they don't have to think about anything except how to get some pattern done in their craft project, or perhaps fishing or something like that. So really a number of different things can help a person get rid of the stress and help their body turn into the mode of recovery. Ideally, of course, we all would hope that we naturally find time for one of these recovery ways. But in reality, people very easily, they're very busy, and we tend to overdo it and overbook our schedules. And a very typical part of coaching is actually learning to schedule some kind of recovery into our days, until hopefully at some point it becomes second nature, and then we can just automatically make sure that our days include some kind of more extensive relaxation or some mini breaks throughout the day that make us feel good. Okay, and this picture shows a couple of examples, sort of concrete examples on how the lifestyle assessment measurement really can help visualize and identify the kind of positive things that people do and how it actually shows up in their physiology. So very different things can cause this green bar to show up in a person's day. The first example here is actually, it's my own measurement from a few days ago. I had a busy long work day. It was all red like this, and then I came home and I just spent about an hour watching mindless TVs. Nothing very useful, but I was laying down actually on one of those bike mats, a relaxation mat, and just watching TV. I didn't have to do anything else, and I got a very nice recovery moment after that. It was very good that day because then I had a sort of a busy evening. I had some things to prepare, a little bit of work, some house chores, and then it was very natural to see some stress reactions then. But sometimes just that kind of a load off time when you don't have to really do anything important, it can be very important for us. Meditation, like I mentioned before, obviously a very good, more conscious strategy, deep breathing, mindfulness, very important role in the busy lives of people these days. And this is from a client's measurement. They could see that when they did the meditation, their body went into a very strong mode of recovery. This is from a guy's report, talking with their girlfriend in the evening. They had a busy day, stressful day, some challenging things going on, but then in the evening we saw that there was a little bit of a green bar, and then when asked what if they remembered what they were doing, and then it turned out that's when they had a phone call with their girlfriend. So that put them in a positive frame of mind and actually helped the body get into a good recovery mode. deep breathing exercise in here, just a short green bar. It's getting a lot of press these days, and even just a few minutes of deep breathing can sometimes help us turn off the stress and lower the stress level quite quickly. All right, and final slide, I put this called supercompensation of life. It's a familiar term for most of you, I think, from the sports world. Supercompensation meaning that in order to improve in sports, the athlete has to overload their body, sort of shock the system sometimes to really improve their performance. And then actually when they sleep or when they recover or have their easy days, that's when the improvement to performance actually happens. And it can be a very fine balance between training enough and hard enough, but not too hard to make sure that the performance improvements can be seen. Very same phenomenon happens with regular people who are trying to improve their performance and achieve great things in life. We need to challenge ourselves sometimes and sort of push our limits, but we also have to allow for the rest and recovery to be able to ensure that the curve is kind of climbing instead of dropping. This graph is from the Lifestyle Assessment Summary Report, and the idea being that if there is enough sleep in a 24-hour segment, this line should be sort of coming back up to the starting level or higher after each day, and ideally at the end of the measurement period you would end up here on the top half of the graph. It's understandable and okay that sometimes even in a good situation we will have days when the balance is a bit negative, like here day 1 you can see that the sleep period was very short and the line didn't climb high enough, but then Saturday and Sunday the person had some very good sleeps, nice recovery, and the line started to climb where it should climb. The bottom example showing the opposite example. Long days, hardly any recovery during the night time, and the line is kind of climbing, dropping the whole time, and ends up here in the resources decreased category, meaning that clearly during these 3 days this person was not able to charge their batteries very well. And the trend over days and over weeks is more important than individually stressful days. And then maybe highlighting the factor that when we are stretched, when we are faced with particularly challenging days or weeks, then it's a great idea to eliminate those stressors that we can and try to focus on just getting through the core things that we have to deal with at that time. So that's basically my message today to the question, good or bad stress. I'm not sure if it answered it completely, and I'll take some questions now, but the final word being that maybe stress itself usually is not good or bad. It's more how we deal with it and how we cope with that kind of tells the big picture. It answers whether it was good or bad. Are we able to come down and recover after that? So thank you for my part, and then maybe Herman, you have some questions in the chat window now that we can address.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Tiina. That was a nice, crisp walk through the material. The first question we have is actually one that I can answer. Stephen was asking if the presentation will be available afterwards, and the answer is yes. Over the next couple of days, our tech team will take the presentation, put it together, and then send you an email, I believe, when the presentation is available online. So there's that. We have an interesting question from Patrick, and he's asking about if you could talk a little bit about what's happening in the transition in the hours or the time before you wake up, where someone is going to bed, they start sleeping, there's a recovery pattern going on, and it continues through the night, and then you start to see a stress reaction prior to waking up in the morning.
Right. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely different patterns with different people. The most typical one probably being this, that instead of what the question was about is that there's a delay in the beginning, and that typically means some kind of a stress reaction that was accumulated during the daytime and then prevented us from actually very quickly getting into the recovery. But if you start seeing the red color more towards the morning hours, so different things. Of course, it could mean that sometimes we sort of naturally start coming awake when it comes close to the time when it's time to wake up. We naturally, our body is starting to get into the lighter sleep cycles and starts to wake up automatically, and that can be an indication of that. Also, of course, with when people get older, they do tend to have harder time sleeping as long as they would maybe like to, and they tend to see red stress reactions coming towards the morning hours, meaning that maybe something is happening in their body that they just aren't able to stay in the sleep mode as long as they would like to. Could be also if you're changing your sort of daily rhythm a lot between weekend and week. So if you're sleeping really late on the weekend and then have to have a very different rhythm during the work week, so then sometimes the biorhythms sort of, they aren't going with the natural rhythm, but instead the body is trying to adjust between those big changes between different sleep schedules. So shift workers tend to see that quite a bit. It's harder for them to stay in the deep sleep for a long period of time. So maybe that answers your question.
I think so. I think so. Stephen had kind of a technical question about how the Firstbeat software identifies the difference between physical activity and stress. I think you touched on a little bit, but maybe we could make it a little bit more clear.
Yeah. So clearly physical activity is identified at the time period where the energy expenditure is increased from the resting level and heart rate is increased, respiration is increased, and then oxygen uptake is increased to at least 20% of the person's estimated maximal performance. So, and then on the other hand, stress and recovery, for this state to be possible, the oxygen uptake stays below 20% of the person's maximal performance. So that highlights the difference particularly between sort of a mental origin stress and a physical origin stress. They're both some kind of stress on the body, but physical activity causes a fundamentally different reaction because it increases our oxygen uptake and respiration much more so than a more of a mental stress situation. All right, maybe one more question, and then I think we are about out of time.
Okay, let me see if I can find a good one here. We had quite a few questions come in, and I guess we'll have a chance to answer these by email afterwards. Yeah. Let's see here. Boy, there's a couple. Let's get this as the last one. David was asking if Firstbeat has data regarding patterns of stress and recovery in individuals who eat different types of diets, whether it's a Western diet, fat and sugar, or whole food. So he's talking a little bit more about how diet impacts stress.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm really hoping that we would start getting more sort of both case-based data and actual research data on that on the upcoming years, because until now not that much has been done on that. Definitely I'm not aware of any larger projects on that, but we do have some case-based data showing that a good balanced diet clearly is going to help people cope with stress and also can improve their heart rate variability and improve their ability to recover at night. But to actually compare different types of diets, so unfortunately we don't really have that kind of data yet, but hopefully that's going to be something that one of you guys will be studying and looking at over the next few years. That would be interesting to know if there is some clear trends in that.
Is that something that people could look at maybe on their own as they would change their own diet and then reevaluate maybe sometime in the future?
Yes, and surely we have quite a few nutritionists who are using the lifestyle assessment as one of their tools, and obviously their interventions would include those kind of strategies. So when they have a client that needs to maybe lose weight or improve their overall well-being and health and recovery, so lifestyle assessment is just one little tool, but then obviously then the tools that they would do and the goals that they would set would maybe center around different kind of dietary and nutritional interventions, and then hopefully with the idea that to see some improved results. And I'm sure that we will have more about that coming up, and maybe we'll have a case study or reference case on that on our website in the next year. That would be a good one to look for.
Okay, great. I think that's a good stopping spot. Thanks everybody for coming by. You can always go to firstbeat.com for more information and about our webinars, future webinars, past webinars. There's also an introduction to the lifestyle assessment podcast that's available there. And you can always email at us at info@firstbeat.com, and we'll be happy to hear from you, even about topics that you'd like for us to cover in the future. Again, the email address is info@firstbeat.com. And I think that's where we'll leave it today. Thank you again, Tiina.
Great, thank
Bye-bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.